So here are some of the basic supplies that I use when I sew. I have a lot more supplies and they're kind of scattered here and there and everywhere, but these are the ones you can get started with. And even then, you don't need all of this. What you really need are, a good pair of scissors, some pins, thread, and some measuring instruments. So what I have here, I'm going to start here at the bottom. We're just going to work our way around. So my measuring instruments here are my rulers and my measuring tape. Usually when you go out and buy a kit for first-time sewers, they have the measuring tape in there. And a measuring tape is 60 inches long. This is made out of fiberglass, I believe it is. And it's used to measure things. I mean, it's measuring tape. But this is what you would use. Because it's long and it's thin and flexible, this is what you would use to measure around a person, to get a person's measurements, like if you're measuring around their waist or their hips, or you're trying to measure from their shoulder to their wrist because you need to bend their arm. So you would use that measuring tape for that. And then you have other measuring instruments. This one is a sewing gauge, and this is what you use. It's about 6 inches long and it has a little slider here. And what this slider does, you can adjust it to whatever mark you want to put it at. For example, like when I hem, I usually mark an inch. So I'll put my mark here, and then as I go along the fabric and I'm folding fabric up, I lay it so that it sits right there on the mark. And it helps me keep everything even as I go around a hem. And this is really nice for sewing. They have it labeled here as a knitting gauge, but I'm not sure. I don't knit, so I'm not sure how you would use it for a knitter's gauge. Next this is a flexible see-through 17-inch ruler, and this is great for when you're pattern drafting because you can see through it. The first half where the numbers are, that's a 1/2 inch, and then you have it marked through 1/2 inches and through 1/8. So you can go through and see, and you get down to the finest measurement here for if you're doing pattern drafting and you're doing seam allowances and you need to get into those details. This is the best measuring tool. Then you have what is called a French curve. And a French curve, can't tell you why it's called a French curve, but this is what you would use in pattern drafting when you want to draw curves like an armhole sleeve, or if you want to do a neckline or any other curvy part of the pattern. So it's usually the armholes and the necklines, and this is what you would use for pattern drafting, and this is awesome for that. And this ruler right here is a hip ruler, and you can see here it's not completely straight. There's a slight curve right here, and that tends to be the curve for most hips. So once again, pattern drafting, this is what you would use to when you're drafting a skirt or a pant and you need that just slight curve that a French curve would be too much for, but a straight ruler is not enough. So they'll give you a nice curve to sit for your hip on your skirt or your pants. Now we're going to move on to our cutting instruments. So here I have 3 pairs of scissors, a rotary blade, and a pair of snips. So this is what I use on a regular basis. These are my paper scissors. I keep these as paper scissors. My kids use them for cardboard and everything else. When you are using scissors, you need to have paper scissors and you need to have fabric scissors, because you do not want to use your fabric scissors to cut paper, cardboard, metal, tinfoil, whatever else. You want to keep them separate because cutting thicker items like cardboard dull your scissors. So keep paper scissors for one and then your fabric scissors for the other. That way they'll always be sharp and they'll always cut your fabric without any snags. Now this is a rotary cutter. This is like a pizza cutter for fabric. It has a lock here so that I can't squeeze the handle to make the blade go out. But if you unlock it, now I can squeeze the handle and the blade and the blade pops out, and it allows me to cut on the cutting mat. This is awesome for quilters. Quilters tend to like rotary blades a lot. A lot of people who sew clothes like to use them as well, but they're not as fine as scissors for like the armholes or certain corners depending on your pattern. But quilters who just cut in straight lines love this because you can cut it and it's awesome. Let's see, okay, we'll lock that back up. Now these are called thread snips, and I keep a pair of these by each machine that I have. And I also have a pair that I keep on a lanyard that I keep around my neck. So no matter where I am, I always have something to snip threads with, so that I don't have to be looking for my scissors constantly. Because usually my scissors are in one particular spot, but these either travel around with me, or I have a pair with each machine that I have, so that I always have something to snip threads with. Now we're going to talk about needles. Needles, there are two kinds of needles. There are hand sewing needles, and there are needles for your sewing machine. Now I have more needles tucked away. I tend to buy in bulk, so that, because I use them quite often. So these are Schmetz needles. You can also get needles from Singer, which have they're color coded, so you know what's what. All you have to do is read the back. But getting needles are important. Getting the right kind of needle is important to your fabric. For example, this is a Jersey ballpoint needle. This needle is meant for knits and not for wovens. If you had a woven fabric, you would get a sharp. Now these are hand needles for anything that I would use hand stitching for. These just happen to be applique sharps. But there are also different needles for hand sewing. So you would need to look at the packaging and see what the packaging says, you know, what they're for the packaging. Always read your packaging, because it usually explains on the packaging what they're for. So if you don't know, look at the packaging. Now, I have just told you that you have particular needles for particular fabrics. There's woven fabric and there's knit fabric, and you have needles for each of those fabrics. And then you have some other options like stretch. So even though a knit stretches somewhat, if you have something that's really stretchy, then you would use a stretch needle. So it's important to learn the difference between the two needles and which ones you would need for which project, and how often you would need to change it out. Because sometimes you can have a needle in your sewing machine for a while and it works fabulously, and then you'll have one project which your stitching looks really crappy, and it's probably your needle more than likely. And if you switch out your needle, then your stitching looks better. So moving on, we have our pencil, our marker, and our eraser. So whenever you're pattern drafting or you need to mark something, these are the best tools to use when it comes to stuff like that. And we also have an invisible ink marker, as well as a chalk marker. Now the chalk marker, I really like the chalk marker, because when you're sewing and you have a pattern, you get your pattern all worked out, you cut it out, and you lay it on your fabric. You can do one of two things. You either pin the pattern to the fabric and cut around the pattern, or what I like to do is trace the pattern. So I lay the pattern on the fabric and then I trace around it with this chalk wheel. And all it does, it has very fine fabric on the inside. I'm sorry, it has very fine powder on the inside. It's a chalk powder, very fine. And there's a little wheel here at the top. I'll screw that back on. There's a little wheel here at the top. I don't know, can you hear it? That makes that noise. So there's this little, so when you're rolling on fabric, the powder will come out and mark the fabric, and then all you have to do is cut on the line. I like that one. But when you are sewing something that you need a better mark with, something clearer, something that won't erase, but you don't want it permanent, then you can use the disappearing ink marker, and then it's either air soluble or it's water soluble, so depending on how long you want the mark on there. Usually I just spritz it with water and it'll fade away as the water dries. And then you need your pencil to draw with, and then Sharpie markers for your patterns depending on what you want to mark. I typically draft my own patterns, so I use a Sharpie on my paper to mark all my stuff. Next is your thread. So this is a serger cone, and this is just regular Gutterman thread, which is what I use. You can buy this thread anywhere. Walmart is starting to carry the Gutterman brand now. I get it at Joann's. I also buy it online when there's a good deal going on. Serger thread is not the same thing as thread that you would buy for regular sewing. Serger thread is made slightly different, and it is made to go through a serger, which is sewing really, really fast. So the threads are slightly different, and they're meant for specific purposes. This is general all-purpose sewing, and this is to go through a 3 or 4 thread machine that goes at high speeds. So it's meant for that. Next, these are just pattern weights. These are used when you put a pattern down onto your fabric. Some people don't like to pin it down because it pokes holes through everything. So what you would do is you would use these are weights, and you would put them on top of the fabric, on top of the pattern, and it would hold everything down as you cut around the pattern. Now I happen to buy these, and they're nice, but you don't have to buy these. You can use whatever it is you have on hand. I've seen plenty of people use their cell phone, cans of tuna fish, and then they have the washers that you get at Home Depot, the big round washers, the metal discs with the holes in the middle of them. People will take a couple of them and keep them together and wrap ribbon around them, and then those become their pattern weights. So you can use whatever, but that's what this is meant for. So next is our pins. These are just regular old straight pins on my magnetic. This is a magnet pin holder. Typically you would have a red tomato usually when you start out sewing, or a pin cushion of some sort, but this is what I like. It's just it's a magnet on the inside, and it holds all the pins together so that I can always find them. And if I drop them, I can always tilt it over and use the magnet to sweep up after them so I can get everything. This is called Fray Check, and I really like this stuff because it's kind of like, I want to say it's like a glue, but it's not a glue. So what you do, you use it on the edges of fabric that you cut that fray. So for example, I have this piece right here, which I'm making for another video, but the canvas that I use frays a lot, so I use it around the edges, and what it does is harden the edges up so the fabric doesn't fray. So if I pick at it, or if I am moving the fabric, the edges won't come out. It's a little stiff, a little crunchy, but that's okay. Once all the edges are on the inside of my project, it won't matter. But it keeps everything together. So I guess it's kind of like a glue, but you're not gluing things together except for the threads. And you just put the drops on, let it dry out, and you're good to go. Last but not least are your presser feet. Now your presser feet come with your sewing machine, and most sewing machines will come with at least 2 feet. Most sewing machines come with more than, but for the very least, to get you started, you would need your standard foot, or also called a zigzag foot, and this is the zipper foot that comes with my machine. So this is meant to help you install zippers, and then just the machine foot that you use to sew with. Now, like I said, most other machines come with at least 5 other feet to use for sewing, but we'll get into those details in other videos. But for right now, this is just all you need to start out with. So there you go.